It is the BS Report with Brian Smith. That's a name I just came up with, but we are talking Xavier Lucas, Billy Edwards, and what is happening in recruiting with the Wisconsin Badgers. That's coming up next. Locked On Badgers.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we are talking portal additions for the Badgers, Billy Edwards Jr., but we got to start with Xavier Lucas. We have Brian Smith on, the recruiting insider, as always. Really appreciate the time, man. Happy New Year. Let's talk Xavier Lucas. Big picture, he's gone. He's not going to come back. Whenever this release gets worked out, he's not going to be on the Badgers next year. What is your outside national perspective on what is going on here?
I'm at the Under Armour game in Orlando, and I'm obviously in a hotel for those of you watching on YouTube. It looks like to me that something went sideways. This is pretty rare. It's random. With the money, how the NIL works, etc. Kids transferring is common as all get out. There are kids that are really happy in programs like Tennessee or Ohio State, Michigan, whatever, that leave over money because somebody in their family wants them to. So you got to remember, this is more than a person. It's oftentimes a family agent. It's big business now. Officially, it's always been big business. A lot of it was just cheating behind the scenes, but now it's more official. I'm thinking that something really went wrong because based on everything that I know, like Xavier, the program he comes from, American Heritage, I know his coach, he's a friend of mine. Like that program, everything is on the up. So for him to go, and even though he's a South Florida kid, he's probably from a pretty tough area if I was to guess. This caught me off guard. And I've never seen, maybe I missed it, I've never seen a school hold a kid to not being able to get into portal or whatever, because in the end, the kid's always going to win because the Court of Appeals is going to favor a recruiting side, meaning the player. I think Wisconsin's going to lose badly in this long term, but I still don't know what stemmed it to begin with, like besides him just wanting to leave. So it's really weird because you just don't see it this way because schools are always afraid to cut off their own hand and truncate themselves in an area that they got to at least start recruiting. And you can't get a player from a program that's got more hype than American Heritage did. They just won another state title. You know, they got kids every single year that can play for the Badgers, period, like 2 or 3. So something really went wrong for this to be where it's at. And I don't have all the details yet, but I'm working on it.
Are you surprised we haven't heard more situations like this happen? I know something's happening kind of at Florida State right now. It's just starting to brew, but
the basketball.
Yeah. With so many, and you mentioned, I've talked to kids too, with so many people in their circle, so many NIL agents, coaches, friends, families, and then other schools tampering and others coaches. Are you surprised we haven't seen more of this?
No, and it works both ways. The problem for players that are trying to get to the NBA, NHL, NFL, MLB, whatever, they don't want to tick off the scouts to make them think that they're just me guys. That's the only reason it doesn't happen a little more. Let me give you the backdrop on this. I knew a year or two ago, just as an example, somebody I had as a contact in the Southeastern Conference told me that there were kids that were in the SEC that were fine, but they were hurt because the NIL money hadn't worked out right. If you know what I mean, they were hurt. So what's the school going to do? Because if you out them, that school that kid came from, that area, whatever, especially if he's from a blue blood high school program, the player has a lot of leverage. It's really tough. But at the same time, they wouldn't go public with it because their goal was to eventually play for the Dallas Cowboys, not play for, SMU or whatever. So it's just the politics of all the things that come with big business that make it private. And to be honest, somebody is going to eventually write their dissertation on how this ends with Xavier Lucas. South Florida kid, American Heritage, top recruit, goes to a Big Ten program, and then it ends obviously very sour. I assume he's going to end up back in Florida or at least deep south. I don't know where. Everybody thought Miami, but they've gotten some DBs since. Maybe it's not. Kid from American Heritage can go wherever he wants. If he ended up at Texas or USC, it would shock me. Bottom line, this is weird because these things do not go public in this manner. They just don't.
Well, I want to ask you about recruiting impact or potential recruiting impact for the Badgers. But first, I want to hit on the on-field. We talked all of last year about how important it was for the Badgers to get a 6'1" NFL measurable type cornerback, right? A guy who could develop into that type of edge player. This is a massive loss on the field for the Badgers, just in terms of potential, in terms of what he could bring to that room and what the Badgers typically have there.
Physically, he reminds me of Notre Dame's Christian Gray, if that puts it in perspective. Like, that's an NFL player, by the way. Christian Gray is probably even better than Lucas, but it's close. Anyway, yeah. Name the next guy on the Badgers roster with the same physical measurables. Yeah, exactly. There isn't one. There are about 10, 15 of him in college football that have his strength, his hitting power, his coverage ability. Came from a program where he was not just coached well, but at an elite level, played elite high school competition. So the transition was – Wisconsin can't just replace him. There's just no shortcut. So the only thing they can do is try to get a portal guy. But how many 6'1", 190-pound corners you see walking around the portal that are saying, I don't have anywhere to go?
Right.
And the ones that are in it, you might pay $750 for a year minimum. Like the numbers I've been told this week at the Under Armour event would make Wisconsin fans cry, because I don't think they're going to try to touch these numbers for kids out of high school. Portal's probably not much different. It's getting pretty tough sledding.
Let me ask you about potential recruiting impacts. So one of the thoughts I had when this happened was Lucas may be sunk cost, right? It may be one of the situations where even if you have, I think Wisconsin is standing on something that makes sense. I think what happened, they believe very firmly in that they were wronged in a certain way. But what are the potential recruiting impacts here, if any, for the Badgers?
Again, I don't know all the details, but you know me, I'm a glass half empty guy, especially the way I know South Florida and the way they take care of their own. South Florida is not really a part of Florida or the United States. It's its own continent. It is very, very touchy. We take care of our own. We don't trust anybody to begin with. That is not going to go well for Wisconsin in the state of Florida, period, but especially South Florida. Everybody knows Smitty at American Heritage, head coach. They're a great guy. In that program, that doesn't give me warm and fuzzies. It's, as I said a little bit earlier, as a general rule, this will lean towards the player in terms of the ability to who gets the upper hand here. It won't be the institution. And you could substitute. If this was Texas, that's about as blue blood as it gets, Texas would be in trouble in South Florida. That's how touchy this is. Now, no offense to Wisconsin, they're not Texas. So it's harder. That's not going to go well. The kids that I talked to this week at the Under Armour event, we had media day on Sunday, have a whole bunch of off the record, like the conversation that I have on the record and off the record, it's like two different states I'm in with these, like, you know, it's like, well, this person's totally different. No, it's the same guy. It's just, he knows the mic's not on. If you're not paying, you're not getting anybody. Like the money and stuff is different. If it's perceived even a little bit that you're cheap, you'll be lucky to get visits from kids in Florida now. It's going to be harsh.
Do you get the perception that players down there are tracking the situation or aware of it? Or is it more of the coaches? Like what level is it filtered down into?
The coaches and the administrators will be first because they're adults and they deal with business, their own, mortgage, paying rent, car. They get it first. But those, like South Florida's got more handlers and 7-on-7 coaches and third uncles than you can possibly count. So it's going to trickle down into that anyway. And again, it's an American Heritage kid. That's one of the best programs in the United States. That's a top 25 program on the yearly. So with that being said, pretty much any kid in Broward or Dade is going to know at the very least. And it's kind of odd, but I've seen some national people talk about it from some of the networks. That ain't good because everybody sees like Pete Nakos or like On3 Rivals, whatever it is. When those people start talking about it, that's the worst thing that could have happened to Wisconsin because not only does it impact Florida, the kid from Chicago is going to read that. The kid from Detroit, the kid from Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Toledo, cities where Wisconsin has to, call their base. That's not good. That's my bigger concern. So you and I have numerous times talked about on this show how Wisconsin's NIL's got to improve. Well, now it's got a black eye anyway, fair or not. And again, I don't know the details. But I'm just telling you, from knowing all these people in the 7-on world, trainers, etc., it's going to be looked at as a black mark.
Let me ask you this quick, and then I want to shift in because there's a bunch of stuff I want to get into today. I always appreciate your time. But what does a school do in a situation? And I want to speak a hypothetical situation because all the details on this one aren't out. But let's say School X has an agreement, a player takes something from School X and then wants to leave 2 weeks later. In this scenario where that's going to be looked at as a black guy, what is the recourse for a school?
Well, I mean, there's always litigation, but most things are settled out of court. So you and I may get the backstory on it, and there may be a settlement where some money goes back to Wisconsin. There's, whatever. It may never make it to a tweet. But at the same time, and I know pride gets in the way here, and a lot of coaches I know are the most stubborn human beings on the planet. That's why ADs are different than coaches. The athletic department needs to be very mindful, and I'm sure they are. Shut your pie hole. Don't tweet anything. Don't hit send. Be smart. Number one, you can get sued. 2, it's going to kill you in recruiting. Those are the first 2 things. And then third, they got to regroup and figure, okay, why did this happen? And again, I don't have the details. Wisconsin, that's what they got to do. How did this get to this point? Why did we not see some of this coming? There's going to be some meetings about that, because if you invest in a player that's recruitment, all the money to go down there to recruit him, I mean, that's just got to sting, because, you and I talk, I'm like, look, getting this kid out of this program from there, this is going to help us. Like, all those things I said were 100%. I knew he was going to start at Wisconsin. They don't have anybody like him. So they got to look at it from a broad perspective, make sure it doesn't happen again. And they got to make sure that they make this go away as quickly as possible.
Great stuff on a somber topic for Badger fans. Somebody mentioned when I told the Discord you were coming on, they're like, oh, good, a dose of reality for the new year, which is always what you're – no, but coming on, we are going to talk about some good news, or at least I think it is. Billy Edwards Jr. coming in as the quarterback, and I also want to ask Brian a couple of your guys' questions, including, do the Badgers have a shot at Naheem Burroughs? That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, the official sportsbook of the NFL. And they're the ultimate spot. If you want to go get your futures, parlays, teasers, spreads, get everything done over at FanDuel.com. New customers get started with $150 in bonus bets with a $5 bet if that wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Do it responsibly, but FanDuel is the easiest, simplest, quickest way for all your sportsbook action. Spice up your weekend, and a great time to do it, right? NBA, college football playoffs are still going on. College basketball's in full swing. A ton of stuff going on over at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's jump back into this with Brian. I want to put really quick. I want to get into Billy Edwards, but I want to put this quick question up that somebody asked. This is from White Marlin. How do high schoolers get more real expectations? Is redshirting and developing still something that can be done?
It's funny. You mentioned that yesterday at the Under Armour event. One of my colleagues, we were talking, I won't mention the player, but I was talking to John Garcia. We're talking about a kid that we hadn't seen before. He's not from the Florida area. And I said, well, what'd you hear on recruiting? And he said, well, he's going to go wherever he can start as a freshman. My first thought is that's a terrible idea, but he's a 17-year-old. Just because the school might start you, there's a reason. They probably suck. So how much development do they have? And I where he's from, we have a pretty good idea where he's going to end up, and it's not going to end well, but whatever. These kids just want to play right away because they're, especially in the game of football, which I understand there's a lot of injuries, they want to cash in as quick as they can before they get hurt. So that's the caveat. Like basketball, you can get hurt. Baseball, but like football, I mean, some of the injuries are obviously, outside of like being in the octagon or something. There's not many more contact sports than football. I don't know how much there is. Wisconsin's done the best job of it, just about any program in the last 30 years. But we've reached a point where outside of a few schools, like some of the linemen that go to Wisconsin or Northwestern or Michigan, some of those guys, those 3-star guys will be all Big Ten as senior, 5th-year seniors. But, man, they're the exception to the rule, especially skilled kids. They ain't playing right away. They go home. I don't really know how to explain it because some of these kids and their expectations, we get to see everybody at these events, and you can tell who's going to play early. Like the best player most people thought here at the Under Armour event has been Elijah Griffin. He was a top 10 kid since his 8th grade year. Everybody knew he was. He's 290 pounds, and he runs like he's 200 pounds. He's not human. There's only a few of those guys. Yeah, he's going to play early. Kirby's going to have to play him at UGA. But how many other, there's 5, 10 guys like that a year. But everybody thinks they're going to play early. That's why the portal is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
God only makes so many Elijah Griffins. I don't know what you can do about the development. And it drives coaches crazy. I actually talked to one of the guys at Under Armour that was in the coaching profession this week. And now we're going to he's not sad to be out because of what we're talking about. He's like, no, I'm not dealing with the recruiting or the NIL or any of this junk. And I'm like, good for you. So nobody knows the answer. Mike, and these are the guys who are making all the money. And they don't know the answer either. I certainly don't, because the kids don't have realistic expectations.
Well, let's talk Billy Edwards. Staying in the portal, Badgers go to Maryland, pull Billy Edwards Jr. over to Wisconsin for 1 year. For the third year in a row, the Badgers go to the portal. It was Tanner Mordecai year 1, Van Dyke and Locke last year, Billy Edwards Jr. this year. What are your thoughts on Billy Edwards Jr. potential fit with Wisconsin here?
I think that his experience and leadership is going to be a big part of it. He's played in the Big Ten. He knows what it's like to get his head kicked in by Michigan and Ohio State. He knows what it's like to play Penn State. He knows what it's like to be at a program that's good but don't have quite as much talent as some others. And now there's really nothing you can throw at him schematically. So they should be able to run whatever they want offensively, and he can at least assimilate. The question I have is how many guys buy into Billy, and I won't know, or anybody else until this summer when you start hearing the rumors about how the 7-on-7, like, remember now, coaches don't get to be around them in the summer. They really don't get to do crap. So you just have to go out there and assume it's going to go well. But I think Billy's going to be a little better than people think. And let's be honest, the coaching staff at Wisconsin's a little bit on the mild hot seat because it just hasn't gone as well as what Wisconsin fans thought. Now, I might have been a little different on their perspective, but I knew what was coming with the schedule. Like, they just don't have the guys outside the numbers. We talked about that for years. Now you got a guy that can throw it. He's got experience. He's been in a pass-happy offense. I think he's a lot better than people give him credit because, and I'm not picking on Maryland, but they're not getting the same dudes as Ohio State, even Wisconsin, on the offensive line. Some of those games I watched him, I'm like, how did he get up from that? He was getting blasted, but he'd get up. So I think he'll make some plays, and they'll at least go to a bowl next year because of him. Now, the question is, who's going to be catching the passes and making plays after the game? Maryland actually has had a few guys that were pretty good outside the numbers. Does Wisconsin finally find somebody that the other team is not just a little bit scared of, but is like, okay, we got to roll coverage or flat out double team this guy to stop him? Billy can only be as good as what his teammates are because football is the ultimate team sport. But, leadership's there, experience is there. So the Badgers are getting a definitive upgrade.
Well, and one of the points I made, the Badgers were 17th in the Big Ten in passing efficiency rating last year. There's only 18 teams in the Big Ten. So if you can just go from bad to solid, that's a big jump.
If they could get to 10th, that might be the difference between, if they had Billy when they played Oregon, they win the game. Mm-hmm. Now, Oregon might have prepared differently, and the game's going to go different, blah, blah, blah. They might have won, though. Oregon was a little off that night. The Badgers played a little better, but it's like one more pass, and you win the football game against the number one team in the country. That's how crazy football can be, and why college is so great. That's what you're looking for. Next year, they at least got to have a wow game. You and I talked about it a little bit off the record, and before anybody asks, no, I am not picking the Badgers over the Crimson Tide. It is not happening now or later. Ryan will get really drunk and pick that when we do a podcast. But
yes, I will
not. I've got the Tide right now. But at the same time, they've got to win one of these games to get themselves some recruiting. It's got to be, quote unquote, cool to go to Wisconsin again. The way you do that, man, is you got to overachieve in one of these games and beat somebody that is a name program to recruits.
Let me ask you this on the quarterback side, and then I want to shift into some of those weapons we talked about, Pauling, Naheem Burroughs. This from Playmaker. How do you balance the quarterback room? Because you see this offseason, Braden Locke leaves, Mabry Metor, who you and I have talked about, he leaves. The younger Landon Locke leaves because you're bringing in new quarterbacks. How many scholarship quarterbacks can you realistically have on a roster in this era of college football?
4 is tops in terms of true scholarship guys. I won't go into this school, but I know one school has a kid that they got kind of lucky to get. There was a preferred walk-on that could be one. They expect at least 1, if not 2 guys to leave after this spring. And that's kind of the norm. You're going to be at about 3 because guys would rather give up the scholarship to Wisconsin and go play Division II because they will not wait. So if you're at 4, you're way ahead of the curve. That used to be the bottom end. It just is what it is. And that's one of the reasons, like people are, I'm sure you've seen some of the X wars on like how the SEC is playing and this and that. It's because the SEC doesn't have the depth they used to. When they have an injury somewhere, the next guy ain't as good as he used to be. Not always, but a lot of the time. That's happening in some in the Big Ten too, because Wisconsin at certain spots ain't as deep as they used to be. It just depends on the spot, but it is what it is. Kids want to play now. They're not as concerned about what jersey they're wearing. They're just concerned they're running out in the starting lineup. It is what it is.
Probably another thing coaches love. Coming up, we're going to talk about Naheem Burroughs. Do the Badgers have a chance at a big-time receiver prospect coming up? Plus, Brian's thoughts on Will Pauling go to Notre Dame and have the Badgers replaced him. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. Really do appreciate everybody tuning in. Today's episode brought to you by our incredible friends over at GameTime. Brian, I'm going to leave you up here because you and I have talked about going to the Bama game in Tuscaloosa next year.
Oh, yeah.
You may have an inside track there. I don't.
I probably do, living in Alabama.
I'm going to get maybe those tickets on GameTime. And Brian and I we'll pregame. We'll both pick the Badgers. I'll get a bunch of liquor in him.
You're going to need to for that to happen. I'm going to need to be passed out.
We will get those tickets on GameTime, though. And if you use the code today, download the GameTime app, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Snake the tickets without the stress over on GameTime. Flash deals, great pictures of the seats before you sit down. It's something I've used to get Braves tickets, Badgers tickets before. We have Brian, we're going to be doing a Locked On Badgers event coming up for an Oregon basketball game. That's going to be fun. We're going to get those tickets over in GameTime as well. So also welcome to come up for that if you'd like to get some February Wisconsin winter in your life.
No. But I appreciate the offer to freeze to death. I'm okay on that. I do like GameTime, and you can go to concerts and stuff too, by the way. That's the other thing, like music, plays, movies, whatever. GameTime's awesome.
It's all over there on GameTime. Snag the tickets without the stress. Download the app. Use code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Snag your tickets over at GameTime. Locked On College. Okay, let's get into this. Finish off this conversation again. Always grateful to have Brian jump on the show. I want to start here with receivers. You and I talked weapons on the outside. Who's Billy Edwards going to throw to? The Badgers lose C.J. Williams. The bigger loss, Will Pauling to Notre Dame. The Badgers' leading receiver over the last 2 years. They replace him when they get Ballard from Ohio State, Mark Hamper from Idaho. A quick thought on those guys leaving and these two new guys coming in.
Well, first off, I don't know what I thought C.J. was going to be a pretty good college player, and it just hasn't worked. I don't know what the deal is there, but sometimes you're like, okay, this has got to be either injury, effort, or both. Because the film doesn't lie. And he ain't played and done much. I mean, how many catches did he have this year for the Badgers?
Ew, I'd have to look. It's minimal.
That's what I mean. He didn't even have 10, did he?
I'll look quick. I think it's probably about where he was at.
Okay. This is a kid physically 6'1", 190 pounds, pretty fluid, played at a major program in California. You're like, okay, he's got a chance to play for and he hasn't done anything. So he had offers from everybody out of high school. So I'm not sure that's a huge loss. Maybe he'll, because every now and then there's a guy that just like as a junior or senior, just the light goes on. And right now, Badgers fans are probably going to say, well, that's what's going to happen because our receiver room's never good, which I would get it. But Pauling is the one that's interesting. I actually talked to somebody about him on the Notre Dame side the other day. And I said, look, he's pretty electric, but he needs to catch the ball. He drops the ball too darn much. And I was told that he may or may not be, from one person's opinion, that somebody worked in Notre Dame, but somebody covered. He's like, I don't think he'll start there, but he'll help him. And then I started looking at it from the Wisconsin perspective. I'm like, well, who's Wisconsin going to put in there? Because they don't have that twitchy little guy like that I know of that's proven ready. They've recruited a couple of guys. They're just going to have to coach somebody up, or they're going to have to go out again and spend more money than what they're accustomed to with the NIL and the portal. This is not easy. I mean, he had 100 catches or something like that over the last couple of years or more than that. That's a lot to replace. So, I mean, good for Notre Dame, but I think it's really worse for Wisconsin than it is good for Notre Dame because he may not start there. He would have definitively started at Wisconsin. So that's really tough. And it really sucks when you're changing your offense that you don't have your leading receiver come back. And that's a kick to the gut, man. So I'm just going to ask you and put this in reverse. Do you think there's somebody else out there, it's kind of early in the portal, that they have a great chance to land at receiver? They can at least be a co-starter or a pretty good player.
It's interesting. I think the guy that it is if you remember, Trechka Kahuna came from Hawaii.
He's a pretty good player.
So he entered the portal and they were able to bring him back, which I think was connected to Pauling. I think they saw.
Oh, because now he's okay, look, dude, you can leave, but we've got a spot now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it made it a heck of a lot. Okay. Yeah. If he would have left 2, then it's time to start thinking about other fall activities on Saturdays. You know what I mean?
Breaking leaves.
I mean, look, nobody likes 4 and 8. At some point, you got to be able to throw the ball on 3rd and 6. And Pauling is not fun to cover. If you lost the other guy that was going to be his eventual replacement, you'd have been like, oh boy. But they also need to add another guy outside. And just generically, and I don't know exactly, but from the numbers that I'm hearing, like $750K for a year is conservative number. I don't know how much the Badgers are going to dip into that number, but that's where we're at now. And that, again, that's for 1 year before anybody asks. For a really, really good receiver, you're paying 7 figures.
Mm-hmm.
So
let me ask you this. So Tretch will come back, and I don't think you're going to get the same production out of Tretch that you got out of Pauling, but they're going to slot him in kind of that spot. You have Vinny Anthony on the other side, who does have speed.
He's fast. I like him.
They were able to keep him. He had offers. He could have left. They were able to keep him. And then they brought in on the other side, it's Mark Hamper from Idaho, who had a lot of production, but at a lower level, or Ballard from Ohio State, who has the physical tools, but has never produced. Like what player, what prototype do you like more? The guy with production at a lower level, or the guy with the physical tools that's an Ohio State type, but can never play there? They're never played there.
Normally, I would just say production, but there's a caveat here. Two parts to it. Number one, Ohio State recruits receiver better than anybody. That's not a newsflash. Southern Cal or Texas might be next. But they don't rotate receivers. They'll play 3 guys. They might play a 4th for a few plays. It's just the way they do it. So guys leave every year. So you can say, well, he didn't develop. Think about the 3 freaking guys playing for Ohio State right now. I know 2 of them personally. It's ridiculous because one of them might be the first pick in the draft when he comes out. We all know who I'm talking about. Carnell Tate's the number 1 for any other school in the country. And then they got Ibuka is like he was number 1 or 2 in the country coming out of high school. I mean, so I don't know how good Ballard is. And he had offers from everybody. If he didn't play at any other school, I'd have been like, well, this probably isn't good. Now, the kid you're talking about from Idaho, I watched his film the other day before you even messaged me about the shit because I was curious. I'm like, okay, why is Wisconsin taking a kid from Idaho? So I just looked it up. He's a pretty good player. Now, my question is when he goes up against Big Ten corners that can play press, I'm not very confident. Zone teams, I think he'll eat up. He's what I call an 8 player. 8 games on your schedule, he'll be pretty good. Those 4 teams that can play man-to-man coverage, I need to see it because they're going to have to scheme some things because he's going to go against guys. Some of them, they're just better than he is. But because he played at Idaho, because he's a white kid, he's going to get, he's no good. He can play. He's just not a burner, twitchy guy. He's really smart with how he runs routes, and he does have more explosion than he's going to get credit for, and he catches the ball in traffic, which especially in the red zone is money. You got to have guys like that. Why not? Because he's going to get single cover with Anthony on the other side. So he could catch 50 balls next year, and it wouldn't surprise me. I just don't think he's going to average 17 yards a catch.
Well, last question here, and I could talk to you for an hour on this stuff, but I want to be respectful of the time. One of the comments we had, and you had brought this up in our Discord, Naheem Burroughs, Try Glasson asks, what have you been hearing with Naheem Burroughs recruitment? For Badger fans, that name sounds familiar. The younger brother of Quincy Burroughs, who's on the roster, came over with Luke Fickell from Cincinnati. A big-time prep prospect. What are you hearing with Naheem Burroughs?
Well, I interviewed him on Sunday because he's down here at the Under Armour game. And first thing is he is track fast. He will run by you like you're in cement. So he's the player that Wisconsin never gets. I mean, he's a lot better prospect than what his brother was at this point. And when I was talking to him about his list, I think it's Florida State, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Texas, and Georgia or something like that. I said, one of these schools is not like the others. What's going on there? He knew exactly what I meant. And he said, well, my brother's at Wisconsin. And he said, I go up there to visit. I said, I guess see my brother, and it's because it's great. And he's definitively interested in the Badger. I didn't figure it was anything more than just but he is. He's not a normal Florida kid. He's at the Bowles School. It's a boarding school in the city of Jacksonville. They're always one of the best programs in the state. They have been for, I don't even know how many decades, but they're tremendous. And he's a mature young man looking at things from a broader perspective. He's got visits coming up to like Texas, Notre Dame, etc. He's just making the rounds. We're not going to know where he's going, I think, until much later this spring is my guess. Kids that are a little more cerebral like him won't be rushed, but Wisconsin's definitely in the mix. And to be clear, this is a kid that I would expect to start almost from day one at Wisconsin.
That'd be a big time get for the Badgers for sure, after all we've talked about.
Yes, it would.
He is Brian Smith, giving us some valuable time on January 1st in between some bowl games here. Brian, thank you as always for tuning in. If you're watching the show after this, go check out Locked On Big Ten, Locked On College Football, your biggest stories there. We will talk more later this week on Wisconsin, and I'm still working on Brian getting him. I'm down to that Tuscaloosa game. We'll get some pregame in there. We'll see. On Wisconsin, appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.